Welcome back to Course 2, Methods and Tactics in our No Man Left Behind self-paced training. In the last session, you used the head, heart, hands chart to define what a disciple looked like and the kind of man that you're trying to produce. In this session, we're going to talk about how do we create momentum with men by providing value for them. I'm wondering, guys, I imagine that you've had an experience where a leader provided value for you at one time in your spiritual journey. How was that impactful, and how did that help you grow?
You know, I remember when I was going through a little bit of a rough time in my marriage and in my spiritual life. A guy called me up, a leader in our church called me up, and he said, "Hey, there's a group of guys getting together, and wondering if you might want to come and be a part of that, and just come check it out. And we're gonna do a small group." And you know, as he and I talked, he was really listening to what the needs that I had were, where I was at. In my marriage and my relationships, and he said, you know, those are the kinds of things that we're going to talk about. That's exactly what we need to do. We need to do this together. And so, you know, I felt like I had a group of guys that knew where I was coming from, that I could be authentic with, but that were willing to meet me right where I was at that point. It was fantastic. It really drew me in.
This kind of goes to the point of getting stuck, and I've been stuck a lot of times on the journey. You just don't know whether to go to the left or to the right. So I'm not sure exactly how this happened, but I early on decided that when I did get stuck, that I would actually go and seek out a leader who was more spiritually mature and further down the road, and just get counsel, or seeking counsel. I guess that would be the spiritual discipline. And so I've done that on a number of occasions with great success. And so I think you can turn that around and say that as a leader, it's probably a good idea to be on the lookout for younger guys who may need some counsel.
That's good.
And I can see that happening in my own life. When someone asked me to teach Sunday school for the very first time as a youngster, I was petrified. Didn't know that I could do it, but he said I could, and he believed that I could, and was willing to trust me to do it, and it changed my life. I'm a teacher today probably because of that.
Wow. It's interesting how many of those stories that you all shared have to do with somebody taking a personal interest in us. I know for me, when I was in college, I had a leader that took a personal interest in me and developed a relationship with me and gave me a vision and all kinds of things that really did provide value and really spurred me on in my spiritual journey. And so in this session, we're going to take a look at how do we do that for men? How do we provide value for them that can create momentum and overcome the inertia that's in every man's life.
Well, welcome back to the No Man Left Behind self-paced training. We're here for session 4, creating momentum by providing value. And in this session, we're going to talk about how do we attract men to become involved in our men's discipleship process that we have going on in our church. And I want you to look at this chart. Tell me, what does this chart look like? Biorhythms. Peaks and valleys, like a roller coaster maybe, or a sine wave, I hear sometimes. Well, you know what this is a chart of is the typical men's ministry. That's what this is a chart of. Have you all had this experience? You have the highs and the lows, right? Everybody gets excited, and then time goes by, and then you're wondering where all those guys went. And then guys get excited again, and then you wonder where they all went. The interesting thing about this chart, though, is that it can help you evaluate what's going on in your ministry to men, in your men's discipleship activities, by the distance between the peaks. What do I mean by that? Well, if the distance between your peaks is, say, several months or years apart, what that means is that you probably had a dynamic leader who was able to attract around himself a good group of committed leaders, and those guys together, they went after it. And they were able to build, over a period of time, a successful, dynamic ministry to men. But somewhere just before that peak, things started to happen. Maybe that dynamic leader's had a job change and he had to move, or had an illness in his family, and so he wasn't able to be as committed, participate as much as he was before. Maybe a couple guys on the leadership team, they had little things happen with them. They moved. They had issues. And so what happened was that the ministry peaked, and nobody even knew that it peaked. And then when it was just past that peak and headed down, all of a sudden one day some of the leaders turned around and looked and realized that half their leaders were gone and their ministry was on the decline, and it might have taken almost as long to build it to rebuild it again. And so you have this peak and valley thing that happens because you have a dynamic leader, but you don't have some kind of succession plan. Remember we talked about if you just get a small group of leaders and you keep that group of leaders insulated, yeah, they can build a dynamic ministry, but if they're not bringing more men into leadership and preparing another guy to step into that leadership, that primary leadership role, eventually this is what your men's discipleship efforts are going to look like. If the distance between the peaks, though, are only months long, chances are what you have is an event-driven ministry. And frankly, this is the kind of ministry that we see the most often when we go and talk to churches. There's a big event, and they do a lot of hype in the church, and they rent the buses, and they get everybody on the bus, and they go to the stadium, and they do the event. And everybody gets excited, and everybody's really on fire. And then they come back from the event, and they talk for a couple weeks about how on fire they are. And then 2 or 3 months go by, and everybody starts looking around, and they're like, well, where's Joe? Where's Frank? Where's Pete? He was really excited. And now he's disappeared again. And then they think about what the next thing. Well, we're going to have this big retreat. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to play paintball. We're going to go whitewater rafting. We got to get guys to go on the retreat. And so they build up the hype. They hand out flyers. They make funny videos to show in the church service. And they get a bunch of guys to go. And guys on the trip, man, they're on fire, aren't they? You hear testimonies and guys saying, man, I this is exactly what I needed. I'm awakened again. And then a month or 2 months or 3 months goes by, and you look around, and that guy that made that big confession that he was going to change his life, and this other guy that said he was, lukewarm, and now he's on fire again, they're gone. And so what we end up with is this roller coaster ministry. The problem is that this is not really what it looks like. It doesn't really look like a roller coaster with a peak after a peak after a peak after a peak. Because what happens over time, if you keep your men on this roller coaster, each peak will be lower than the peak before. Because repeated failure inoculates your men against being involved. It inoculates your men against men's discipleship. Because they go, well, what's the point? We're all going to get excited, and then everybody's going to go away again. And then we're all going to get excited, and then everybody's going to go away again. And so you get this been there, done that mentality, and guys go, you know what? I've done that. That was great. I enjoyed that. Now I'm going to do this other thing. And oftentimes, that other thing has nothing to even do with the church. And so we've got to prevent this roller coaster ministry. Otherwise, we will just simply be telling guys, this is just another thing in your life. Try it for a while, and then you can move on to something else. We don't want to just get a bunch of guys excited and then have them leave. We want to sustain their interest. We want to sustain their participation in discipleship so that they can sustain themselves on their spiritual journey, growing closer and closer to Christ. And that's what the Create, Capture, Sustain cycle is designed to do. Specifically, it's designed to break this cycle of up and down, up and down, up and down. And so the first step in breaking this cycle is that we do need to figure out, all right, how do we attract guys? How do we get guys involved in the activities that we're having for men in the church? And the first thing that I'd like to remind us about is these categories of men that we had. Remember we talked about the 5 types of men. Men who need Christ, men who are cultural Christians, men who are biblical Christians, and leaders. And then we talked about these hurting men go across all of the different types of men. So when you think about a guy who's looking at maybe coming to an activity that you're doing in the church, we've talked about this before. He's got a decision to make. Everything that you put in front of him, he's got a decision to make. Am I going to do this, or am I going to do something else? Is this going to be something that's of higher value to me than watching that football game on TV, or going and hanging out with my buddies, or going on that hunting trip, or whatever it may be? We're always competing against other activities that a guy has. And so one way to approach this then is to think about what are the needs that guys have that we can show them how the gospel might meet those needs. Now, when a guy's early in his spiritual journey, you don't say, well, you have this need, and we're going to show you how the gospel will meet that need, right? Because he has no context for that. He doesn't understand that. But as a guy goes deeper and deeper in his relationship, our language is going to probably shift more towards, we're going to show you how growing in your relationship with Christ is going to help meet these different felt needs that you have. And so let's think about what are the kind of needs and interests that a guy might have based on where he is spiritually, these felt needs that a man might have. So what do you think a felt need is, a typical felt need is for a guy that's just out there in the world who probably has maybe no interest in spiritual things, or maybe not more than a passing interest in spiritual things? What are the things that he is interested in, that he's thinking about? Friendship. Acceptance, good.
Someone to love him.
Say that again?
Someone to love him.
Someone to love him. How is he expressing these needs? Like, how is he thinking of these things? What would be the need that would drive him to a bar? Yeah, hanging out with his buddies, right? So friendship, also he wouldn't call it fellowship. What would he call it? How hanging out? Socialization. Yeah, social. Okay. What about recreation? Right? Good. What about a guy who's sort of, his family goes to church, he goes to church, but he's not really into it, but he goes to church. What are some of the felt needs that these guys are out there facing? Now, first of all, what's the first thing that you would put on the list? Most of these things, right? But he might express it a little bit differently. What other things would you add to that list for cultural Christians? Financial. So you might have some financial needs. He's looking for maybe some purpose and meaning. Good. Validation. What do you mean? Tell me a little bit more about validation.
That what that man is doing is being received and acknowledged.
That what I'm doing is worth something. Yeah, good. What else?
Especially the right things.
The right things. Good. What else would you put under here?
Somebody that he can relate to or that's like him.
Okay. So this guy might be looking for buddies. Buddies. Whereas this guy is now sort of going to the next level, right? He's looking for friends. See the difference? So I hang out with my buddies at the bar, but my friends are maybe the guys that I talk to some of these other things about. Okay, what about biblical Christians? So what's the need that he's meeting with that? Okay, so he wants to grow closer to Christ, right? Now he's beginning to think about these things because now he's a biblical Christian. He's a guy who believes in the gospel. So now he's probably a lot more interested in spiritual things. What else would be a felt need for these guys?
Intimacy, emotional intimacy with other men.
So emotional intimacy. Is there a manlier word that we can use for intimacy? Connections, how's that? All right. You said relationships, that's good. And what's he going to look at these relationships? If this guy wants buddies and this guy wants friends, what does this guy want?
It's kind of like
A deeper relation. Well, as far as with his friends though.
it's kind of like somebody
Accountability, good. So what his felt need is probably for brothers, right? Someone that can walk with him, that can challenge him, that can hold him accountable. And so you'll see this progression actually with a lot of felt needs is it's sort of the same felt need as you go along, but it begins to be expressed in more and more spiritual terms as a guy moves forward in his walk with Christ, okay? Anything else that you would put here? I think these guys, they want like Bible knowledge. So they want to know Christ better. They want to know the Bible better. They want to know their brothers better. They want to have real connections. Now, this guy's looking for someone to love him. This guy's probably got issues in his marriage and as a father, maybe. This guy's obviously, now this guy wants to learn how to lead his family. See the difference? So this guy's looking for love. This guy's, probably trying to figure out how do I be a good husband? He's probably, what does it mean to be a good husband? He might think that being a good husband means like getting home by 5:30, earning a living, buying life insurance. Like that makes me a good husband. Okay? Whereas this guy now, he's trying to think about how do I lead my family? How do I provide a safe environment for my family? And then what's a leader thinking about, for instance, in relationship to his family? A guy that's sort of on the right side of the biblical Christian. A legacy. How do I leave a legacy?
Growing others.
Yeah, how do I introduce or lead my family to Christ, right? Okay. What other felt needs would you see in a leader? Yeah, fine. So maybe I want to know what my spiritual gifts are and how to use them. Yeah, so now maybe I'm looking for how can I be a mentor? Right? How do I do that? What does that look like? How do I shepherd another man or how do I be a ministry leader? So there's a lot of how-tos in a spiritual sense maybe as you get farther along in your journey. Now you can add tons under each of these columns, but you can see that as we're thinking about our men, we're thinking about how can we attract them to become involved, the kinds of things that they're going to want to participate in, that are going to appeal to them, that are going to draw them in, they're going to meet their needs according to where they are spiritually. It doesn't mean, you're not going to get a guy who is early in his walk or maybe has no interest in spiritual things. You're not going to invite him to a 24-week study of a book of the Bible. Right? But at the same time, if all you ever offer these guys is basketball leagues and outdoor camping trips, eventually they're going to go, where's the beef? Give me something good. So let's think about that then. What types of activities? We've already got some, fishing trip, father-children things, sports and recreation, job issues, health issues. What other kinds of activities can you think of that would reach guys more on this left side of the continuum? Family picnic, good. Look at these felt needs and tell me what kinds of things might meet those needs. A wild game dinner. Maybe like dinners around big sporting events, like the big, and the Final Four, Super Bowl, things like that. Dinner at like Super Bowl, etc. What else? How about like maybe a parenting seminar? If you could frame it in a way that's like, we want to help you be a better parent. These father-child things, these dances and things like that are all great. So parenting opportunities. All right. What about more on this side? What kinds of events and activities would draw a guy who's a biblical Christian or a leader in? Yeah, so maybe a retreat. What else?
Man in the mirror studies.
So certain Bible studies would do it, absolutely.
Marriage
Marriage retreat. Okay. Small groups, right? These guys going to do small groups? Not so much, right? Not small group Bible study. How could you get these guys into small groups? How about calling it a softball team? How's that for a small group? Meets weekly, has a common goal, has a set membership, somebody's in charge. Sounds like a small group, right? So now is every small group going to be like that? No. Down here the small groups will probably have a curriculum, right? They're going to take more time. There's going to be accountability for homework that you've got to do. There's a little bit more of a commitment. It's spiritual. But down here, it's more short term. You got a season. It's 10 games, right? It may or may not be. A softball team's tough to be open, but you can join at the beginning of the season. Anyone can join, and your commitment is just for the team, for the time that you're there. But you don't have to do homework beforehand. You probably have minimal practices, and it's based on somebody's interest. And so you can see that as we move down the continuum, if we want to attract men, if we're going to create value for men, we need to plan things and opportunities that will meet them where they're